Welcome back. Now, John Patrick Amama Mbabazi's sacking from the coveted position of Prime Minister did not surprise many political observers who have been keenly following the events within the ruling party Politburo. Many believe he was dropped for attempting to contest for the highest seat, which according to insiders is against the unwritten credo. And to many, this belies the dictatorial tendencies of our leaders who are afraid of internal competition, not only in the ruling party, but the opposition. And that is the talk of the nation tonight. I am joined by Makerere University Law Don, Dr. Businje Kabumba. Good evening, Dr. Businje. Welcome to Talk of the Nation.
Good evening.
I'll get right into the discussion. The Constitution sets out prerequisites for one to seek the highest office. And we've seen youthful supporters of Amama Mbabazi arrested and thrown in jail, and yet we call ourselves a democracy. Is there really a democracy in Uganda, or is it just a fallacy?
I think from the very beginning there's always been something ironic about restoring democracy to the gun. And there's always going to be a problem about that, because then the question becomes, how do you transition from military regime to a more democratic system? The same challenge has, for instance, been felt in Ethiopia. You've had a number of times the president describe himself as a revolutionary as opposed to an ordinary politician. And that was almost the same script that Meles Zenawi was using. So I won't say we have the appearance of a democracy, of course, but I think the real power lies with the military. And I think that's a critical factor that has been and will always be, I think, for a long time to come in our politics.
Are you surprised by the events?
No, I don't think so. I think anyone who has been looking at what has been happening saw it coming. I'm surprised, though, that that the president chose to do this, because I feel far from an act of strength. I think he comes off, I think the former prime minister comes off stronger in this case, because he seems to have forced the hand of His Excellency. He seems cooler, calm, collected. He seems to have, I think he comes through this stronger than the appointing authority. Interesting observation. Now, when Pastor Niemola was huddled in a Nazi concentration camp, he said, famously, and I quote, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionist, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me." Is it fair to say that these words ring true for Amama Mbabazi, who at one time accused Dr. Besigye of jumping the queue? I think it's a very excellent summary of the position. But also I think it's a reminder to us now to be a bit kind and gentle to him, because what's happening to him now could happen to anyone. I think that the trend, I think at the time he may have felt that he was placing his bet with the president, that if you stick long enough and you do the right things and you're disciplined and you play by the rules, then your reward will come. And I think he must have been under the honest but now evidently mistaken belief that there's a certain system, a certain queue indeed, and that Besigye then was jumping it, and those who remained in the queue would eventually reach the promised land. I think what has happened to him disabuses him of the notion, definitely, and I think sends out a very strong signal to anyone else that there is in fact no queue. The system is, there is no system, and the incumbent has no plans of going anywhere anytime soon. And I think that's a very important watershed moment. And I think it really vindicates those who, early on, I think starting from Waswa, who left the NRC and noted early on that there was a problem. Once in 1989, you change the rules. You have said you're a transitional government, and you start changing the rules for longevity. That becomes the trend of, you know, and I think therefore, right now, I think it calls for a serious reflection among Ugandans to see where are we, and where are we going? Precisely, because I think the gloves are off, the illusions really. If any illusions were left, I think this is the time when they are gone.
And I think more than just where are we going is how can we actually get there, and what can we do at this point in time. Now let's look at the issue of ethnicity. There seems to be a question of ethnicity playing an integral part in our politics. The appointment of Dr. Ruhakana Rugunda, in my opinion, was meant to placate the sentiments of Banyachigezi, including you perhaps, that one of their own had replaced the other. Do you foresee any danger in this?
They actually, I say, there's militarism. I think the fact of the military, and I think the Besigye coming out, that was someone who was in the bush, in the trenches, and Amama had been in the external wing. There's that factor. there's a fact of gender, because I think behind the scenes, I think we can see the role of Mbabazi's wife, his sisters-in-law, his daughter, and that's a very interesting dynamic happening. And of course, on the other side, the role of the MP for Ruhama, and I think that's a very important role. So I think you have a very interesting dynamic here. So you see men in suits in the front, but very powerful women, behind them. Things, exactly. But I think thirdly, and as very importantly, the question of ethnicity. And I think, quite unfortunately, I think there's a problem. If you look at the ruling party being led by someone from the West, the opposition, FDC, the major party being led by Mugisha Muntu, and before that, Besigye, and now the internal opposition in NRM, if I can call it that, Mbabazi coming from the West, I think you have a real problem there that may sort of, I don't think it demonstrates a sensitivity towards the national psyche, national senses. And I think from that perspective, I would fault both Amama Mbabazi and the president for not being sensitive. I think this is not the time for Muchiga to be fighting Nyankore, for instance, because really at the end of the day,
they're essentially the same.
Exactly. So I think it calls for restraint, humility, and I think the smartest thing for either of them, Amama should not really be fighting for this position. I think he should just take a step back, retire, let the president, God willing, and if there was some goodwill on his part, find someone else, identify a capable Ugandan from somewhere else.
Would that make him the bigger man?
It would be wiser. It would be much wiser, not just for him, but also for the so-called Westerners, in the sense of sustainability, to avoid the Rwanda, to avoid the Kenya, where you're seen as a cabal who have taken up too much of the public space and also then the economic space. I think none of the actors are being particularly foresighted in the sense of what happens when they're gone, because it's just a matter of time, really. You know, it's just a biological fact that Uganda will stay,
even after they have gone.
But what happens to the stability of the country and those sensitivities? I don't think many of the political, including the opposition, by the way, you cannot replace Besigye with Muntu. And I think perhaps that's where Madame Betty Kamya had a point, that you must be sensitive to the makeup of the country ethnically.
But it's kind of difficult to be sensitive when their egos are at play, isn't it?
Precisely, and that's why I think they must look beyond themselves, because at the end of the day, you go as actors, you know, you may leave the stage, but if you leave a very bad feeling within the population, of course what will happen? If the worst came to the worst, people will jump onto helicopters and planes and leave.
But that's just a minority.
Then it's Musinja in Namgongo who would suffer for all the sins of all, you know, and that's really the challenge. I think the failure of our political actors look beyond the self. Really, I don't think we should be having the names from the West being the ones in the front pages tossing it out. Yeah. I think there should be a sensitivity now and a retreat that leaves, you know, the time for others to have their stage.
Okay, now there are those who say that Amama Mbabazi, who has been very close to the president since the Fonasa days, should have a grasp of the Machiavellian politics, where the closer you rise to the seat of power, the more vulnerable you are. Is it possible that Mbabazi was offered a poison chalice when he was appointed prime minister? Or did things just go haywire somewhere along the way? I think he committed the ultimate sin of being ambitious. And I think the appointments, those who have replaced both Bukenya, also who committed the similar sin of having ambition and then displaying it nakedly, I think the replacements of both gentlemen, I think, show, you know, a movement from Bukenya to the more subtle, mild-mannered Sekandi, movement from this very strong Mbabazi to a more mild-mannered Sato, who is into health, gentle, unassuming. I think you've seen the,